Good afternoon, Hartford, and welcome to the fifth segment of Voices of Veterans. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the economic costs of the war, especially as it pertains to its effect on Connecticut and Hartford. The budget problems in Hartford are manifesting themselves by the serious talk about bankruptcy in the city of Hartford, the deficit that the state of Connecticut is carrying. And according to the nationalpriorities.org website, which keeps a track of the cost of the weapons of mass destruction and the war machine that currently is being operated by the United States government in two major conflicts that we're involved in, has cost the city of Hartford alone $444.5 million. This is over a period of almost 16 years that these wars have been waged. This has a serious effect on our federal tax dollar that's supposed to come to support all of us in the country for all of the things that are necessary to keep our society functioning and moving along. And just lately, we saw that our two Senators Blumenthal and Murphy, were very happy about the defense budget that they put together with the Trump administration, which is supposedly going to give Electric Boat, Sikorsky, and UTC the ability to produce more submarines, more helicopters, and more weapons of mass destruction. And they're going to be hiring a large amount of people to fill their slots for engineers, for welders, for workers that work on the machinery that runs these helicopters, and that runs the billion-dollar nuclear submarines that we're manufacturing. Now, I find it to be very disconcerting that they can find billions of dollars for the defense budget at the same time that the state of Connecticut is talking about laying off teachers, healthcare workers, police, firemen, and the city of Hartford is being threatened with bankruptcy and our loss. We have a police force that's severely undermanned at this particular time. There's even been talk of closing down public schools in neighborhood schools in the city of Hartford. And just lately, the Hartford Public Library has talked about closing neighborhood branches that affect the populations that really are in dire need of library services. So there seems to be a continuous theft of federal funds to go to one side of the equation while the other side is asked to sacrifice. I'm going to read a few things that were written by myself when we were talking about all of this that was going on, and I have some facts and figures here about the true cost, the economic cost of the wars that we've been waging for the past 15 years. In Iraq and Afghanistan, silence has become a weapon. Silence begets complicity, the silence of the American people and their elected public officials that makes them complicit. By our silence, we are complicit in the deaths of 5,000 fellow Americans, 300,000 Iraqis, and the wounding of over 30,000 Americans and over 1 million Iraqis. The U.S. media is complicit by their silence in not reporting casualties daily, nor do they report the continuing rise in suicide, self-inflicted wounds, drug overdoses, and sexual assaults on female service members. The Pentagon and the military-industrial complex is complicit in the destruction of the American economy by their silence about pro forma accounting tricks that have eviscerated and depleted public pension funds. Corporate fraud is a pandemic that has robbed the American people, and elected public officials have been complicit in this by their silence about it. Pro forma accounting, as opposed to generally accepted accounting principles, allows you to cheat, hide money, hide debt, and cook the books. An article in the CFO magazine revealed that 54% of 181 publicly traded corporations use pro forma accounting. Some of these are GE, AOL, Time Warner, Microsoft, Viacom, Disney, and IBM, to name a few. On January 29th of 2002, CBS News reported that the Pentagon could not account for 25% of its funds, totaling $2.3 trillion. This was in 2002. I hate to think about the amount of money that it has now become. Benito Mussolini is reported to have said, "Fascism should more properly be called corporatism, since it is the merger of state and corporate power." Here is an example of the silent truth. There are currently 6.6 million people in the U.S. either in jail, on probation, or on parole. Of those, 2 million are incarcerated. There has been a trend in America toward employing many of these prisoners as virtual slave labor for the multinational corporations. Inmate laborers now do everything from processing your credit card statements to making your airline reservations to assembling your tennis shoes. The Department of Justice operates something called Federal Prison Industries, known as Unicor, a profit-making venture to benefit American corporations. There has been a deafening silence by our elected officials as they have turned their backs on the American taxpayer. Our congressional representatives have spoken up for jobs at Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky, and Electric Boat, all military-industrial clients, but not one word about the jobs lost in public education, health care, libraries, and public works. They are complicit by their silence. I will not remain silent, and I demand that all of our city council members, the mayor, and the superintendent and board of education members break their silence and speak up against the monstrous cost of illegal and immoral wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Your silence has been killing men, women, and children. It is time to raise your voice or prepare to reap the whirlwind. Herein lies a history lesson that will further show as an example of how we're allowing this to happen and what the cost of it might be in terms of the veterans coming home. We had been told on leaving our native soil that we were going to defend the sacred rights conferred on us by so many of our citizens settled overseas, so many years of our presence, so many benefits brought by us to populations in need of our assistance and our civilization. We were able to verify that all this was true, and because it was true, we did not hesitate to shed our quota of blood, to sacrifice our youth and our hopes. We regretted nothing. But whereas we over here are inspired by this frame of mind, I am told that in Rome, factions and conspiracies are rife, that treachery flourishes, and that many people in their uncertainty and confusion lend a ready ear to the dire temptations of relinquishment and vilify our action. I cannot believe that all this is true, and yet recent wars have shown how pernicious such a state of mind could be and to where it could lead. Make haste to reassure me, I beg you, and tell me that our fellow citizens understand us, support us, and protect us as we ourselves are protecting the glory of the empire. If it should be otherwise, if we should have to leave our bleached bones on these desert sands in vain, then beware the anger of the legions. Marcus Flavinius, centurion in the second cohort of the Augusta Legion, to his cousin Tertullus in Rome. This frontispiece is written in the beginning of Jean Lartigue's novel, The Centurions. The author was himself a member of the Maquis, the French resistance in World War II, a soldier in the French Foreign Legion, a participant in the First Indochina War, and then a war correspondent. The book starts at the collapse of the French army at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. 10,000 French soldiers and their allies have been defeated by barefoot guerrillas led by General Vo Nguyen Giap and Ho Chi Minh. The Viet Minh forces disassembled artillery and carried it piece by piece up the mountain passes, bombed daily by the vaunted air power of France and the United States. They pounded the French positions and overran them, capturing 4,000 officers and enlisted men of the French paratroopers and infantry. For 4 years, they languished in re-education prison camps, giving self-critiques on the crimes of colonialism and capitalism. They survived by learning how the methods of the Viet Minh had been successful. The French called the Viet Minh les myrmidons, the termites or ants. On their release after the 1958 Geneva Accords, many of them went to war in Algeria as the 10th Parachute Regiment. They saw the same methods being used to wage a war of independence. The Algerian Muslim rebels' catchword was Istiklal, independence. On May 13, 1958, officers of the French Paratroop Regiment enacted a popular movement to recognize a Franco-Algerian independence accord that would require removal of all French troops. Istiklal. I read these books little realizing that my war in Vietnam was born long before I was. I walked the same cliques, the kilometers that the French walked. I fought the same men that the French fought. We have learned nothing. Today, my brothers in arms are fighting the same war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Veterans are coming home and bringing their wars with them. IVAW, the Iraq Veterans Against the War, has been enacting street theater viewed on YouTube as Operation First Casualty. And if you go to YouTube and type in Operation First Casualty, you will see one that was done on St. Patrick's Day in Hartford in 2014. Resistance among active duty troops is rising, as it should. We are being sacrificed, and that sacrifice is being purposely hidden by the media. Who reports daily on the KIAs and the WIAs? No one. Who will tell the tale of 48 dead on any month in Afghanistan and 7 dead in Iraq? No one. If no one will talk or listen to us, the veterans, we will talk and listen to each other. Time will come when we will act as the legions come home. The corporate oligarchs who managed the Wall Street disaster and the disastrous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are afraid of the awakening of the American people. In any organizational chart of government, the chief executive, such as the mayor, is at the top of the chart, then the city council and the department heads. There is, however, one line above the mayor and all other government executives, including the President of the United States. The first 3 words in the U.S. Constitution, we the people. The people are the final executive power, and all elected and appointed public officials are subject to the people. This having been said, it is the people's contention that the Obama stimulus money that comes to the state of Connecticut, which has already come to the state of Connecticut and the city of Hartford, is to be used to stabilize the workforce by ceasing the layoffs of public employees, especially the public schools. The hiring of vendors and consultants should cease. The Obama administration and currently the Trump administration promised and put in place a transparency doctrine. The people demand that the city budget and the Board of Ed budget also exhibit transparency by posting the entire budget online. It is also time that the cost of these insane wars be exposed and visible. Another 17 Americans died in Iraq in that month and 18 in Afghanistan. Over 200 were wounded. Where is the accounting for this in the mainstream media? Who among you has seen the casualty list? An American Army officer was indicted for stealing $699,000 in Iraq. The CEO of Blackwater, Eric Prince, has received over $100 million for his mercenary contractors. The American taxpayer has paid $500 a month to over 100,000 Sunni insurgents to not kill American soldiers. That is $50 million a month. If we were not in Iraq, they couldn't kill our people, and we would have saved almost $1 trillion. I leave you with this thought. In a ham and egg breakfast, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. Vietnam veterans used to have a saying that paraphrased comedian Richard Pryor: "There is no justice, there is just us." The people have been committed to the meat grinder of the war and recession by our leaders, and soon the chickens will come home to roost, and there will be justice. The advent of the new wars in Iraq and Afghanistan has produced the same dying for us and the people of Iraq and Afghanistan. Early in 2002, 4 Rangers returned home from Afghanistan to Fort Bragg and killed their wives and then themselves. Gulf War veterans of the First Iraq War have been sickened by depleted uranium and anthrax vaccines that were not FDA tested and approved. The war machine of my nation has expended $300 billion to kill men, women, and children. The collateral damage that we so blithely write off is someone else's mother and father, son, and daughter. We have created more insurgents than we killed. The spiritual and psychological damage done to ourselves and others is potentiating, that is, growing and multiplying. The violence virus we brought home from Vietnam has been passed on by the military-industrial complex until it permeates the society and the economy. War profiteers and businesses need to adopt economic conversion as a goal to provide humanly responsible jobs and sustainable economies. If we want to stop the war in the streets and the schools of America, we must stop the wars our fearless leaders start. Currently, the now President of the United States is sending 4,000 more troops to Afghanistan. I must end with a quote from another American patriot who spoke truth to power. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hope of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging on a cross of iron. That was a speech given by Dwight D. Eisenhower, April 16, 1953, the same patriot warrior who identified the military-industrial complex and told us to beware. I'm going to read you an example of exactly what goes on in Iraq as far as the cost and the money that's being spent to take care of the troops. This is from the book Packing Inferno, The Unmaking of a Marine by Tyler E. Boudreaux. This chapter is called The Land of Oz. When those 4 American contractors were killed in Fallujah back in March of '04, it was like the answer to our prayers. The Marine Corps laid siege to the city and prepared for an all-out attack. That's when the regimental commander called our colonel and said, "Grab your stuff and get your people up here." That was the best news we'd heard since we got in country. What could be better, we thought? Leave this shithole in Mamadouya, leave Route Jackson far behind, and get into a historical battle in Fallujah. Hell yeah. We were all in. I was picked to go on the advance party in Camp Fallujah to help iron out the details of our transition. This meant a few days away from the battalion, and as far as I was concerned, that was okay. Everybody seemed chilled out. Nobody looked worried about the war or about incoming. Nobody wore their gear. I gaped wondrously at 2 Marines jogging down the street in their little silky shorts, and I said, "Man, we ain't in Kansas anymore." Running around bundled up in helmets and flak jackets, dodging mortars, rockets, and IEDs was our norm. That was our Kansas. This place was like the land of Oz. He was talking about the Green Zone in Baghdad. The regimental command post was a miniature palace with its marble floors, its 8-foot windows, and its 12-foot doors. The whole building was pretty magnificent. I walked into the foyer, which was probably bigger than the house I live in today, and found it lined with rows of ominous-looking wooden crosses about the size of a grave marker. On every cross hung a flak jacket and a helmet. It looked like a memorial site to me, but in fact it was more like a coat closet. Then I wandered out into the COC and found the place cool and quiet. There were comfortable chairs and great big flat panel computer monitors hanging on the walls. I didn't even know they made them that big, I remarked, astonished as a clerk as I passed by. He smiled at me dully and went back to work. The place was high-tech. It was laid back, too. Nobody was screaming into phones or radios. Nobody was sweating their asses off or swearing at the war or trying to pick up a detail or two from other units in contact. There were no units in contact. Nobody was calling in medevacs or scrambling for the Social Security numbers of wounded Marines to type into casualty reports. The people I met were dull and affable and mellow on the point of lethargy. Am I in the wrong place? I asked myself. I looked at him kind of funny and said, "What the hell is a mortar hour?" He shrugged. "You know how some guys put a pie chart together and tell the general this is where we're getting hit the most? So the general says, we got to wear our gear during these times, hence mortar hours." Then he laughed. Nobody was listening at first until he told the chow hall not to let us in without our shirt on, our stuff on. Now everybody has their shit. I shook my head. Jesus, you had me coerced with food to get you to wear your gear? That must be some pretty damn tasty chow. He stopped and looked up at me and surprised. "You never been in the chow hall here?" He shook his head with a smile. "You have no idea, my friend." The man did not lie. I really did have no idea this kind of sumptuous fare was available within the boundaries of war. It was a royal banquet every day. There were king crab legs, Cornish hens, and steaks to boot. There was a potato bar, a taco bar, ice cream bar, pasta bar, salad bar with soups and breads and spices, fruit displays and dessert trays, and they were well manned by Iraqi men stuffed into white shirts with black bow ties. I was pretty sure the Iraqi people outside the gates weren't eating so well. I knew a lot of Americans back home who weren't eating so well either. Jesus, I gasped. I gazed across the splendor. Who the hell is paying for all this shit? No one answered. No one needed to. We knew who was paying for it, and we knew who was getting paid. That's just an example of the disparity between what actually goes on in the streets and out in the battlefield and what is happening back home here and what is happening to the people who are looking for real to have something take care of them, to have something done for them, to have their tax dollar be afforded to do what it's supposed to do. And this is why today I am doing this program. This is why today we go to City Council. This is why my comrade and I, Steve Fournier, write the things that we write and go online and blog and try to get the American people to wake up, the people of Hartford, to not be silent, to not be complicit in what is happening to them in the city of Hartford. This is what needs to be done today. This is what you as Americans need to do to take back your government. This is the most important thing that you can do as a taxpayer, is to make sure you are heard, to make sure you speak, to make sure that you are listened to make sure that they see us. That in and of itself is what programs like this are all about. It's what Hartford Public Access TV is all about. It's a chance for you to have something to say about what's going on in your city, in your neighborhoods, in your town. And that's, in a sense, what has happened with the library and why people are fighting so hard for the neighborhoods to keep the small amount of goodness that we have, the small things that do the things for us and our families that are what America is really about. It's about seeing each other. It's about the people. It's about us. And that's why it's most important for all of us to keep on speaking out and reading and bringing information to our neighbors, and also going to council if you must, and call up the newspaper and talk to them. Get on the television. Come and see the people who are doing things in your neighborhood. Get out on the street and make sure they know that we're here and that we exist. That is the most important thing that we can ever do.